Hi everyone, welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Judy Wong. Judy is an international educator, consultant, and life coach, also a great podcast guest. She's a certified practitioner in the Silva Method and skilled in TESOL, management, arts, non-profit organizations, and fundraising. She's a strong entrepreneurship professional with an MA TESOL from the New York School for Public Engagement. I had a great time having a chat with Judy again, and I really do hope you enjoy the episode.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you've never imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. And today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Judy Wong to you. And Judy is a self-described international educator. Is that self-described, or has somebody pinned that label on you?
Oh, they've kind of pinned that label on me.
And you're in New York now, is that right?
Yes,
or did I get that wrong? We just talked about New York beforehand.
New York City. I'm from New York City.
New York City. So tell me, how are things in New York? Because this time, maybe last year, New York was terrible, wasn't it, with the COVID situation? It was one of the worst places in the US. Is that right? Or am I?
I think the world makes a bigger to-do out of it than New York makes a to-do out of it. But it hasn't been so bad. Everybody carries on. It's so bad. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's the younger generation think it's so bad. It has been quiet. I mean, it was, I live in the theater district. So, it's in Hell's Kitchen, but that's like sort of the theater district. So it's been like Sunday early morning, 24/7, which is good and it's bad. I mean, it's bad because there's no businesses right now. It's Midtown. So it's still pretty quiet, sort of. Theaters are starting to wake up, so it's a little bit busier than it's been. The rest of the city's gotten busier. The outer boroughs were the ones that got hit the most because the outer boroughs, Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, those are the places that had the most congestion and immigrant population and a little bit tighter living spaces. So,
Gotcha.
And plus a little more packed density wise. So they had a little more impact than we did.
So tell me about Hell's Kitchen. The last time I heard it was Gangs of New York. Is it still like that, or it's more gentrified? It
hasn't been gangs in New York in 40 years, darling.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's been kind of polished up, and it's now
it had a major gentrification that happened about 30 years ago. Well, 40 years ago. Partly because it was always very, very poor immigrants, and still is very poor immigrants, but now we've got a lot of rich people who've moved in. And they've built a lot of high-rises and rich high-rises around. So it kind of got a little better, but quite honestly, because of COVID, no one was using the sidewalks and the streets anymore, so that curiously interesting element came back out.
And speaking of gentrification, you started your career in the property business, is that right? Or you had a career before that?
No, I started my career as a performing artist. That's why I lived in Hell's
let's
Kitchen.
go back there, like 15 years ago.
Like 60 years ago.
Okay. So tell me about starting out as a performing artist, because when we first started the call, I think you have this kind of jazz voice, this late night radio voice sometimes when I talk to you. So,
Yeah.
what where did you start?
I grew up as a professional actress, singer, dancer, and a model, and I did a lot of work. So I'm an over 60-year veteran performing artist. I'm also a visual artist. My schooling is actually in the visual arts. I was a sculptor, woodworker, and designer.
So how about your parents? Were they also artistic, or were you a breakaway? Were they disappointed that you didn't get a proper profession, or were they okay with everything?
Well, my mother actually, she worked in business, but her degrees actually were in art. She was an artist who went into the business world for money. My father was, a middle-class worker. He actually worked ultimately for the post office, but he was the controller there. But my father actually was a singer. When he was in the services, in the Army Air Corps services, he actually sang in their I guess choir corps or something like that. But he was actually a brilliant tenor.
Okay. So, when we have the idea of, let's say, Chinese families, or nowadays Korean families, is that they pressure the kids to become, in a profession. Was it like that with other Chinese families when you were growing up, or is that a newer thing?
Yes and no. I mean, it depended on how Americanized the families were. My father's side of the family had been here for almost 5 generations. So we weren't terribly Chinese. So my father always, his attitude was, do what's going to make you happy. Because if that's going to be the right thing, it's going to be the right thing. My mother, on the other hand, was a little more Chinese. And she was a little neurotic about the A++ crap. But I was a little on the rebellious side, so I really didn't care what she said.
And still are, I think, Judy. But yeah, so we'll get on to the A++ thing when we talk about students in a little bit. So
Right.
you started off in performing in visual arts, in sculpture, and then what happened after that? Where did your
Well,
career
I
take
got
you?
into education because I started teaching 45 years ago. I started teaching preschoolers. But in those days, preschool was considered avant-garde, something that wasn't going to stick, and something that was just sort of one of those hippie things that hippies did. So I got hired as an artist, actually, to teach preschool. And being that I only knew how to teach art at the time, I mean, I taught. Back then, I was teaching all the arts. I taught theater and singing and visual arts and that sort of thing. So that was what I knew how to teach. But I realized very quickly while I was teaching preschoolers that I actually had to teach them academics, because they actually, even though they're preschoolers, kids are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. And they wanted the academics. They were very bright, but they wanted the academic side of things, and they were interested in, and it dawned on me as I was teaching them the arts that I was actually teaching them the academics. So while I was teaching them theater, they were actually learning English. And they were learning all the important things, reading and writing and speaking. and while I was teaching sculpture and arts, they were actually learning their maths, and they were learning their sciences, because you had to learn about structure and you had to learn about balance, and so they were learning their sciences and their maths. So basically, I developed a curriculum where I was teaching academics using the arts, and that's what I continued to do in private and public school settings as a guest artist teacher, because I didn't actually have a degree in teaching at the time. my degree was somewhat interrupted by my mother, the A++ neurotic, but but yeah, so I ended up teaching for many years in the school systems, in private and public practices, as a guest artist. I would get hired as a guest artist because it was the only way they could hire me. And then I would end up teaching academics. Usually the students that gave me were the students that, I hate the labels they give to the kids. Like, they call them disabled or learning disabled. And I said, stop calling them that, because
they're actually
nothing...
kinder than a lot of,
yeah.
we used to hear when we were growing up, the R word was used,
right.
weren't they? Or
yeah.
S, you know,
right.
slow.
I mean, but
yeah.
it's, there's nothing disabled about them. There's nothing retarded about them. There's nothing slow about them. They just learn differently. And the cool thing is that when I was teaching them the academics using the arts, it leveled the playing field for them. So they didn't have to be like everybody else. They could be learning art, but they were learning the things they needed to learn. You know, they just use it using through art, because art, music, art, and I consider music and art, all of those in the arts, is a universal language. So it doesn't matter, you know, how they're learning or what they're learning. They learn it. And a lot of times what I realized was that it wasn't that they had learning disabilities, but they actually just didn't speak English. Or they were, you know, not native English speakers. And for me, that was, it was a kind of a sticking point, because I grew up as a bilingual speaker. I grew up speaking Ecuadorian Spanish and English. I actually thought to some degree I was Ecuadorian Spanish until I was about 6, when I was in grade school. But the reason I grew up speaking Ecuadorian Spanish is because my nanny was actually from Ecuador, and I spent more time with her than I ever did with my mother. And I remember it bothered me as I grew up that this woman was brilliant. She was actually an engineer, but she couldn't work as an engineer in the United States because she didn't have, she had the English down fairly well, but she wasn't considered fluent enough to function as an English-speaking engineer. So she couldn't work as an engineer, but she actually had an engineering degree and was quite smart. So that kind of bothered me, that people were throwing non-English speakers into the disabled category. And I'm like, there's nothing disabled about them. They're actually smarter than you are.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I picked up there, that you were ahead of the curve, really. You were ahead of your time regarding education. So now, of course, in Finland, they have famously have classrooms without subjects. And then, you know, there's more emphasis now on people with, what would we say, more neurodiversity is not the word they use now. Yeah. So you had spotted this in what year? In the 70s, 80s?
1980, 79, 80 was when I started teaching preschooler kids.
And how was the support system for these kids back then?
Totally stinky. I mean, they were thrown into like, they were just thrown into like the throwaway kind of category. And you can't really blame the teachers at the time so much as because they were never taught how to recognize working with these students. So the only way they were taught to teach children was that you keep throwing this stuff at them and it either sticks or it doesn't stick, not understanding that maybe there was something else going on with these children that maybe you needed to pay attention to, you know. Like, for example, I know that mostly because I was bilingual, that a lot of the reasons the students that don't speak English, did not grow up speaking English, or some of them were actually born in the United States, but their parents were from somewhere else, and their parents were interested in them maintaining their own language as well. So unfortunately, they immersed the child in their parents' native language before they are the age of 2, and did not really introduce or start immersing them in English until after that, which unfortunately locks what their default language is going to be, because basically we are developing what our default language is by the age of 2, and I guess I understood that a little better, because I understood that students sometimes, it's not that they're dumb or they didn't understand things. It's that when in doubt, you're going to default to what your default is, default to what you already knew or what instinctively knew. And a lot of times it's another language. And if it's another language, then you're trying to decode an English piece of text in another language, and it comes out all gobbledygook and totally unrecognizable. But if somebody actually read it to them, they would totally recognize all the language that's confronting them. It's just that they never knew that's what it looked like in a reading form or a written form. And I understood that because when I was very young, like I said, I spoke Ecuadorian Spanish, and that was sort of like a native language for me. So when I went to grade school, I was considered a smart kid. So in the United States, only the smart kids had a second language in grade school. So
what is grade school? I don't know, I'm not from the US.
Very early age,
Oh,
kindergarten through 6th grade.
One of those American terms you hear on TV and then you kind of forget about, and then you hear it again. So what does it mean? Yeah.
It's early school ages. So it wasn't common to get a second language back in the early 60s, late 50s. If you were in grades kindergarten through like 6th grade. Second languages in the United States were not introduced in schooling until they were older, like junior high school, middle school, or intermediate or high school level, upper grades. But if you were very smart, and in New York we had a program for very smart kids, and if you were very smart, and I guess somebody tagged me as very smart, you got to do second language, and very often it was Spanish. Unfortunately, it was always level 1 Spanish, so 6 years of level 1 Spanish is nauseating, especially if you're already a Spanish speaker.
I can imagine, yeah.
So I remember when I went to 7th grade, and they said, "Oh, you get to choose languages for your second language. Would you like French or Spanish?" I said, "Anything but Spanish." But I learned something which was interesting, that when in doubt, we default to what we know. And I had a really hard time learning French because it's so similar to Spanish in some ways, because they're both Latin languages, that when in doubt, I defaulted to Spanish. And I didn't even know I was defaulting to Spanish, except that my French teacher kept yelling at me continually, "En français, mademoiselle, en français." And I was like, I am speaking French. What's the problem here? And then
that's kind of the opposite of most people's experience, isn't it? People who speak Romance languages, oh, that guy can speak 4 languages, but he's already French, and he spoke Spanish and Italian and Romanian, and it's like, yeah.
So it was really funny because I didn't realize how embedded my Spanish was until one day my friend, who was another Spanish speaker, says, "Oh my God, Judy, do you know what you just said?" And I said, "No, I'm speaking French." And they're going, "No, you're not." I said, "Well, what the hell was I saying?" They said, "Well, you said, 'Bonjour, ¿cómo estás usted?' Muy bien, gracias. Sí, yes." And they said, "You're a little confused." And I said, "What?" And they said, "You're speaking Spanish and French, but you're speaking it simultaneously." And I went, "Oh, well, I knew it wasn't English."
Yeah, it works like that, doesn't it? If you ever live in a foreign country, you've learned, a little bit of every language, and suddenly you try to think of a word, and the word from the other language comes in, doesn't it? It's you try to bodge it together. Yeah.
Well, it was pretty funny. So, which helped me because years later, when I was working with a lot of students, young students, who were struggling because English was not their native language. When I listened to them read aloud to me, I realized they were doing what I used to do when I was a child, which is default to the language that I knew, the pronunciation and the sound system of a language that I already embedded knew. And once the child became aware of that, like I became aware that I was using my Spanish and not my French, I became a lot more aware of when it was coming in, and I was able to stop it before it does, But it's that awareness that they don't have. And once you actually help them with that awareness, it's a miracle how well and how quickly those students who supposedly could not read because they don't know English suddenly burst out of the gate and is reading a storm because they realized that they have to conscientiously, at least for the time being, make the effort to consciously bring in the English sound system to their world and not lean back on the default.
It's interesting because for what we talked about already, and then what you've mentioned there, it reminds me of a meme actually I saw today, and it was about popcorn, and said they put the kernels into the hot oil, but the kernels pop at different times, don't they? Learning
Right.
is a little bit like that as well.
Yes, exactly. And most people don't realize it's just that actually people who are multilingual are actually much, much smarter than people who are monolingual, because their brains are firing at double the time and double the speed because they're trying to decode in multiple sound systems in multiple languages. So their brain is actually working twice as hard and twice as fast, which is why, the problem is that if students are born in the United States, but their parents are not, very often they've been acclimated to not English. And so the problem is that even though they're Americans and they're considered native-born English speakers because they're American, or they're born in the United States, or they're born in Britain or whatever, they're actually functioning as a non-English speaker because the embedded language that was embedded in them when they were very young was not English. So the problem is they get thrown into a monolingual school, and the monolingual teachers have no idea how to work with them. And their assumption is, well, I'm just going to keep throwing the curriculum at them, and it's just because they're stupid that they don't get it. And it's because their brains are firing in a different sequencing than you assume they're firing. And that's kind of important.
Well, it's not it's not just a problem for the non-natives or for the maybe immigrant children, is it? I mean,
No.
That's for everybody. I think
Right.
I saw a documentary. It's probably on YouTube. George Monbiot, I think Monbiot.
Yeah.
I can't remember. He's a writer for the Guardian, but he
Right.
he was on a field trip with some kids, and one kid in particular took his interest, and the kid was very insightful, very intelligent. Everything in George's words, everything he said was,
Right.
something to be, remarked on. And he went to the teacher and said, "Oh my God, that kid is a genius." And the teacher said, "What are you talking about? He's like he's the bottom of the
Dumbest,
class."
yeah.
So I thought he felt depressed after that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, very, very often, like I teach privately. I'm a private teacher as well as teaching in schools, and I taught in universities over the years. But a lot of times, the children that get brought to me, they're always being brought to me around the 4th grade or the 4th level, because that up until that point, monolingual students and multilingual students are being taught language the same way. They're being taught distinctively. They're learning individual words. They're learning sound systems and things like that. But then they hit the 4th level, and it's assumed that the child, the monolingual speaker, will have begun fluency. Because at that point, they've had the influence of outside of school, of English immersion, as well as inside of school, distinctive immersion. So they will have reached a certain amount of fluency. So now they're being thrown massive amounts of reading and text without being given guidance as to how to read it, okay? Which up until then they are. And so now basically they're on their own trying to decode stuff based on what they instinctively might know. And that's a problem, because if you're a multilingual student, your brain is still working out the kinks, as it were, Your brain is still trying to figure out all of the little innuendos and the problems and all of the differences. And because they're not just working with one language, they're working with multiple sound systems at the same time. And they're trying to sort them all out. And where a monolingual speaker is not, they've got one and that's it, which is why multilingual speakers will reach fluency if they are addressed properly and they're identified properly. They will reach their fluency, but they reach it usually 1 or 2 years later. Okay, but the problem is that in the school systems, they're so busy categorizing people that here are these children who up until that point would have had like the top scores in math, the top scores in English, the top scores in sciences and everything else, right? They suddenly reach the 4th level. They still have the top scores in most other subjects, but their language subject suddenly drops to a 2. And the teachers say, "Oh, well, they don't know English. They're just dumb. They can't learn it. They're disabled. They've got learning disabilities." Because they don't understand. They're actually trying to translate the text in another language. Because you're no longer giving them guidance as to how to decode specific words. And so now they're being faced with massive amounts of new language that nobody's ever taught them how to decode. And they know the words because they've spoken the words, they've heard the words, and they understand, but they've never seen it. So they don't know how to decode it. And so they're now trying to decode it in another sound system, language sound system, like Russian or Portuguese or French or Spanish or something. And it looks to them like an alien word. So now they don't understand the text.
It's unfortunate, isn't it, that people who may struggle or do speak a different language, they're often labeled as stupid. I mean, it's not just in the US. I think when I lived in China, there's this is a situation was that lan zhou mian. Lan zhou mian is for those that have never eaten it. I dream about it. I restaurant. So it's a noodle made made in Lanzhou, which is kind of northwest of China, and it's mostly lamb based, and they a lot of good food. So I go in maybe once, twice a week, and in the restaurant my Hanzi Buha, not so
Right.
good at the Hanzi. So I was reading the menu and I called the guy over and I was like, what's this, what's this dish? I can't read it. And then he turned around to the guy in front of me, after speaking Chinese to him, he said, that guy's stupid. He can't read Chinese. So it's like,
Right.
what you expect? I'm trying to learn the language here. Yeah. But I don't know. And he said it after I speaking.
People do that, I was always told I was stupid by my more Chinese relatives because I don't speak any Asiatic languages. I speak a lot of languages. Asiatic is not one of them.
Yeah, for someone living in Japan, it's not really a comfort, but I know the difficulty. Yeah,
I mean, I wasn't brought up speaking anything but Spanish and English, so it's like, I don't speak any Asiatic languages. My brother and my sister studied in college, so they speak some, but I don't speak any of it. So yeah, I mean, and then I have that I have the disadvantage of having a Chinese name and looking like I might be Chinese. So yes, I get all sorts of nasty reactions because I don't speak any Chinese. I don't speak any Asiatic languages whatsoever. I mean, and the extent of the few Asian or Asiatic language words that I might know are the basic ones that every New Yorker would know, like every New Yorker knows how to say Happy New Year. So we all know how to say Happy New Year, it's like, I there's not much that I know.
Xinyan Kaila. Okay, so yeah, it reminds me of a Chinese comedian, or actually a Chinese Canadian, and I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen this clip. Maybe you know him, but because you're a comedian, also you've worked in that circuit.
Yeah.
But he recounted a story of when he went to a Chinese restaurant, and the guy was, he thought he could speak Chinese, read Chinese. He handed him the menu, and it was, all in Chinese. And the joke was, okay, I'll have circle, circle, box, box. So that was, yeah. So it's a little bit like that. There is a struggle. Yeah,
there is a struggle. I mean, my brother got married, and it was very cute. It was his best man was this white guy from his fraternity, and Bobby was so happy that I was the maid of honor and that he was going to get to sit in this big Chinese banquet, because Chinese banquets, if you've been to them, are great. It's like 13 amazing dishes that are really delicious. And
did they have the dragons and the pig and the...
Yeah, there's all sorts of
that, yeah.
So, so Bobby was so excited because he was going to be sitting with me, at this banquet hall, and he would finally get to know what all these dishes are, right? So he's like, great, Judy, good, you're here. So you can tell me what this is, right? I said, yeah, sure. And the first dish comes out, and I'm like, oh, you're going to love this one. It's crunchy and not too sweet. It's good. And then the next dish comes out, and I go, oh, this is really nice. It's kind of like, it's a seafood thing, but, it's sort of, I don't know, like slimy, but not, like, it's good. It's, crunchy, and, the third dish comes out, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's kind of like sweet and with, meats, and it's yummy. And he looked at me by the third dish and went, what the hell? I could have told myself that's what they were.
Yeah, that's...
I said, you didn't actually think that I knew what the hell all this shit is, did you?
So, Judy, I wanted to move on. So we'll talk a little bit more about education in a minute, but I want to kind of move more towards your business experience. And you eventually, there's maybe a circuitous path, but you got there to property development. Is that right? Is that or interior design? Isn't that right? You told me.
Well, yeah. I worked for a while as an interior designer I was the chief design assistant for a major interior design and construction firm. My boss was Winston Churchill's granddaughter. She was a little nuts, but she was really sweet and really smart. But it was an interesting. We were renovating a major hotel in New York, an old hotel. I suspect that she got the property because she was going through a divorce, and her ex-husband was a major retailer, real estate mogul in New York. But it was, I don't know, it was I did a lot of jobs because I guess growing up as a professional performer, there is something that is unlike any other profession. You are always in a state of unemployment, so you take on other jobs. And being that I was very, very smart, I had a lot of skill set. I had gone to a special arts high school that was kind of like, there's a school in New York called LaGuardia Arts High, which is a college prep and conservatory school, which actually back in those days, that was not what that school was. My school, my art school, was what that was a college prep conservatory. So I had this skill set, and I was a brilliant draftsman. I was one of the weird people who actually like drafting in architecture, which in those days meant you actually sat in a really dark room with a light box and you just drew straight lines all the time and measured things. We used to call it the DG room, the dark room, or the dungeon room. But I was one of the few weird people who actually was really good at it and very good at drawing and drafting and reading drafts and blueprints and things like that. So I got hired by this interior design construction firm and worked my way up to being the chief design assistant. And that's also how I eventually figured out what computers were, because my boss was like, we're paying these computer geeks to do stuff for us, and they don't even understand what a color wheel is, for crying out loud. And she said, will you go back to school and learn this, computerized drafting stuff, because then you'd be even more valuable to the company and whatnot. So I did. This
was long before iPad Pro and all these programs.
They didn't have all those fancy things. You actually had to learn bits and bytes. But the funny part was...
that takes me back. Yeah, bits and bytes. That's like 1980.
You actually had 84. To program. This is the early, mid-70s. So you actually had to program. The funny part is that my older brother was one of the first doctorates in AI. And when we were kids, and he got really excited about computers, and that's when computers were the size of a New York City block. He was telling me, oh, you got to check us out. You should do your art on these computers. And I was like, I'm an artist. I don't do machines. And I refused. I absolutely refused to learn this computer crap that he was getting into. Little did I know that years later, before I got this interior design job in construction and business, that my brother knew that I was a Star Trek fanatic. And he said, oh, I've got this great new Star Trek game, and I know you like games, and you're really good at math. So, why don't you check out this game that I have? But you got to come to my house in Rhode Island, and I got to hook up to the Brown University computer, and it's in there. But it's a great game. You get to kill Klingons. And I thought, oh, what a great game. Star Trek, and I killed Klingons, right? They do trajectories. But it was actually... They
didn't really look like Klingons. They looked more like Cheetos or something, did they?
No, you had to map out. You would get an instruction, Spock says, blah, blah, blah. And you would have to map out the trajectory and figure out where they might be. And and all of this. And it was because you had to do math. So, you did all that. And I love the game. Well, I like math, but I love the game because it was Star Trek. And I would be obsessed whenever I go to his house. I'd tie up his phone line because in those days, that's how you got the internet.
Oh, this sound, yeah. Mm.
and I did that for a while. And then years and years and years later, here I am working as an interior designer, and I'm going back to school to learn, architectural digital drafting, right? And I had to learn computers, and I had to learn programming, and I had to take all these basic programming, basic computer classes, learning the bits and bytes things and everything and how to program. And as I'm taking this class, I'm sitting there going, I already know how to do this. This is killing Klingons. My brother, the sneaky little bastard that he was teaching me how to program computers by telling me I was learning to play a game killing Klingons. So he used my love of Star Trek to sneakily teach me how to program computers so that I didn't know that. It was just bizarre when I'm sitting there taking this class going, I already know how to do this vector stuff and programming. So that was pretty wild for me.
So you had a pretty unique skill set collected. So you had your fine art background, sculpture, education, of course, and then of computer programming. So
right.
How does this feed into being in business for yourself? So you already mentioned it's being in business, the uncertainty that an artist would have, or
right.
Actors,
right.
They don't know when their next check is going to come in.
So I started getting into this. I started studying computers, which then got me into, building a computer is like sculpting. And in those days, it's not like it is today. You can, everything's so easy. You actually had to create that. You had to, put, brains in there, like CPU chips, and you literally had to, sculpt it if you wanted to create a computer. And I finally was saying to my brother, I want to get another. I finally decided I know how to do this computer stuff, and I'm going to do a computer. And I need a computer. And he's like, you should wait until we could start. They're upgradable. And then he finally let me get one. And he goes, these are upgradable. Because in those days, they were like Ataris and those horrible old Apples and those Commodores and things like that. And
this is mid 80s, isn't it? Commodore is like 84, 85, something like that.
No, early 80s.
Oh, really?
80s.
Was it early?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm showing my age now. Yeah.
So
we had another one called Amstrad, but you didn't get that one in the US. We had Spectrum, Amstrad, and Commodore. They're the main ones.
Commodore was one of the few that managed to get past Atari and all of those. And so I finally got a computer that was upgradable. And I was like, I need something faster. I want to put a new chip in. And my mother, who became a programmer, I guess that's what artists do. We become programmers. So she became a programmer. She was a visual artist. And she's like, I'll get you somebody here to put that computer together for you. And I'm like, the guy was taking forever. And I finally was like, how hard could it be? I'm a sculptor. I'm a mathematician. I could put this stuff together. So I took the darn thing apart and I started building it myself. And when the guy finally showed up, he goes, wow, this is really nicely done. Who did this? And I said, I did. And he goes, well, why'd you need me? Because you did a really good job. So that grew my next business, which was an IT consulting business, which I sort of still have. I keep it on the side for when I need
break
the pandemic,
glass in case of emergency.
Like the pandemic shows up, when you need to have another job on the side. But what I started doing is I started building computer systems for small businesses and individuals.
And what year was this?
This would have been, I guess, late 80s, or late 80s, early 90s. And I started building small computers and computer systems for people and doing IT support, because at that point I had learned about Macs and how to run Macs, which I found annoying. They're just terrible technology.
I like the way you put that. Annoyingly annoying.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's because it's old technology that is so locked up. And back then, Apple. I mean, if I could have
Was this
hired
Apple II time? Was it maybe?
this was Steve Jobs, when Steve Jobs came in. If I swear to God, if I could have afforded him as my marketing exec, I would have done it. He was brilliant. He came out in the early 80s and he said, this is when he created the first beautiful, colorful looking monitor. And he said, we could never compete on the technological side because we just don't have it. And then he goes, but nobody likes ugly. And I want everybody to have a personal computer on their desk. So nobody likes ugly, and and people will eventually have personal computers, which he was smart. He realized that. And nobody likes ugly. So I'm going to create the first pretty looking, beautiful looking monitor. And that's what he did. He created monitors in all these beautiful looking colors. They were wonderful looking stuff on the outside and all old technology on the inside. But it looked good on the outside. So, he told everybody it's brand new, which it was. It was brand new on the outside. And the inside were old technology, but they were brand new components. So he wasn't lying. They were brand new. But it was old technology, meaning slow, glitchy technology. And he was brilliant. He took a page from Rolls-Royce, which Rolls-Royces never break down. You know why? There is no breakdown report in existence on Rolls-Royce. They do break down, which is why when you buy a Rolls-Royce, you get a full maintenance and an emergency service that goes with it. Because if your Rolls-Royce breaks down, they come, they fix it, and there's no service record.
Wow.
So Rolls-Royces never break down because there's no service record, right? So the thing with Apple and Macintoshes and those was that they never got viruses or Trojans. Of course they did. They always got viruses and Trojans. They always got hacked. Maybe not as proliferantly because there was nothing worth hacking in them, but yeah, they always got viruses and Trojans. They were always constantly getting viruses and Trojans, but there was no report ever that there was a virus or Trojan, because no one was ever allowed to open their system, and no one was ever allowed to know what their working systems and their programs were, unless you were a certified Mac or Apple tech. Okay. And those people who were not allowed to tell the customer anything. But, us techs, we talk. And what people didn't understand is that every time they brought in their rig to an Apple or a one of those, an Apple tech service place, a repair or a troubleshooting that should have taken 20 minutes to an hour always took at least an average of 24 hours to 3 days, depending on the size of the rig or the size of the device. The reason is because the first thing that has to be done when any rig or device gets brought into an Apple tech service place is they do a full shakedown and they clean out all the garbage, like the Trojans and the viruses and all of the things. And then they just tell them, oh, there was a software problem. Don't worry, we fixed it, right? Software problem or hardware problem.
Yeah, it reminds me, actually, there's a YouTube channel I like. Well, actually, there's a couple of these where they get old computers and they switch them on again. I think there was one it was ThinkPad, IBM ThinkPad from 96, 97. And it was never taken out of the box. It was left in storage in some company. And one of the viewers sent it in and the guy opened it up and he put on what was the game? I think Doom. Maybe if you remember that game, he'd put it on the original cartridges.
Oh, they work.
Yeah.
They work. They work.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with them. They work. I mean, the thing is, though, that what was brilliant on his part is he wrote into the warranty that if you opened any of their devices or rigs, you automatically voided their warranty.
Still have that, don't they? I think.
Yeah. And the reason for that was because they didn't want anybody to open it up and find out that there's old technology inside. Because if they found out there was old technology, then it kind of throws out their thing of why they're charging you a small fortune for new technology, which is really just a new component, but old technology. And, you know, the thing is that he was brilliant because he knew in China and Japan and all of the places that made the components that they literally had stockpiles of components because they would make them by the hundreds and thousands. And then, you know, as my brother said, the technology was immediately becoming antiquated within 6 months. So as soon as it became antiquated, none of the tech heads like me would want it anymore. I don't want that. I want the new one, right? So now all of these places were left with huge stockpiles of old technology. And there was nothing wrong with the technology other than that it was old. So maybe it was a little more glitchier than the newer one, but it still ran, it still functioned. You know, it's just that it was older, right? It functioned slower. It didn't function as fast. You know, just there's little things like that. And Steve Jobs was brilliant because he realized the consumer had no bloody idea what the hell anything was. So all he had to do was tell them it was a new component. And it was a brand new component sitting in a warehouse for the last 2 years. You know, because on the average, their technology was at least a year to 2 years or more old. And he sticks it into pretty new outside, which is brand new. It's pretty new outside, which is usually made of plastic so that it breaks very easily, you know. And then he tells them, I'm giving you state-of-the-art brand new stuff. And he uses little words like i7, you know, so everybody says, oh yeah, i7 is the new thing. It's a big new chip. It's the fastest new chip. Yeah, it was at the time. When he finally put in an Intel chip, was the fastest new chip. The problem is that when he put in the i7, he put in the i7 release 1. At the time when he did that, we were already into the i7 release 3. But what does a consumer know?
Exactly. So tell me, Judy, yes, about your own business. Obviously, you've taken some of the better ideas from Steve Jobs. We won't say these, but for you, tell me about your businesses that you've run. You had your IT consultancy, and you have a tutoring business as well, or as Americans say, tutoring. Sorry. Yeah. Yes,
I tutor students, young students, and I tutor older college students too. I'm also a college counselor because at one time I worked in an admissions office for colleges, so I know the inside and the outside of college application processes. So I know how to guide students toward giving themselves the best choices and the best way to look for college, which is not necessarily
quite a big
the
business
way.
Now, isn't it? The college admissions.
It is, though. I don't like what some of these people are doing. They're lying and they're cheating. And, you know, people will come to me. They'll say, I want a guarantee. I said, I can never guarantee that you're going to get into a school. However, what I can do is I could teach you how to put yourself in the best light, which will get you as close to the top of the pile as possible. You know, I will teach you what they're looking for and how they're thinking so that you understand that, because most college counseling is given from the consumer or the student side. of thinking, right? And nobody bothers, very rarely do they bother to tell them the counselor's side of thinking, which if the parents and the students understand the counselor's side of thinking, they know how to position themselves in a way that the counselor is going to want them. You know?
Absolutely.
The admissions person's going to want them,
Yeah.
you know? And very often they get all tied up into things that are not the most important things, which is like the scores, your college entrance exam scores is probably one of the least important things that, you know, I mean, it's important in the sense that you should make sure your score is well within a range of the type of student that they would take, you know, but your score is not going to decide whether you get in or not. And how high your score is not going to decide whether you get in or not. And whether you are a valedictorian or not is not going to decide whether you get into the school or not.
That's one of those other American words, valedictorian, I used to hear, and homecoming
Yep.
queen, and grade
Yep,
point
yep.
average, all
the,
these
the
things.
type of the top, you know, the top kid. Being the top kid in the school is not going to necessarily get you in, you know. Maybe daddy buying the school a $7 million endowment might get you a leg up, but it's not going to get you.
Absolutely.
door.
Or, of course, you could go for Trump University, but as a fallback. But yeah. So that's interesting. The whole college admission process in the US. I mean, from where I am in Ireland, basically, you just get X score and you go to
Right.
you know you
Right.
get your
Right.
college
Same thing
place.
Right.
Yeah, in UK as well. And
But it's
yeah.
the whole thing. It's like, you know, and that's why when the admissions people tell them it's an organic process, they're not joking. You know, people go, oh, what's the process? What's the process? It's organic, meaning ultimately, if we like you, not just, you know, we're going to vet you and make sure that you can function and you have the brains to function in this school, right? And you have, you know, the intelligence to function in the school. But ultimately, what's going to get you in or not is, do I like you?
Good point. Yeah.
Do you fit in with my bunch? Are you going to fit in with my friends? You know, if you're going to be like a weirdo outsider, no.
This is very Chinese thinking, I think, isn't it? Because, you know, if you want to do business Chinese, you get the hot water, don't you, first? And you have to sit down and
You got to be nice.
maybe the American one's more
hospitable.
functional and business-like, but, you know, the whole Chinese way is like, you know, you just talk about something
Your
first. and
family.
then- yeah, exactly.
That's right. If you're
Yeah.
family, you work with me. If you're not family, I stab you in the back.
Well, they stab the sometimes family in the back as well.
That's true too. But you know, yeah, there's a different sort of hospitality kind of thing with business, and that's another thing. You know, like I taught at Pace University. That was the last university that I was teaching at, and so I taught a lot of business students who are English learners. A lot of them were students that got conditionally accepted to the university, but their language was not up to par, so they were required to do an English intensive program. So I worked with a lot of business kids, and business students, they don't understand sometimes that there's more to just knowing the business. And so I work a lot with them, not just on their language, but understanding how to be more, how to learn more about other people before you try to do business with them. Because
Well, that's not really a surprise, Judy, if you've ever worked for some corporate organizations, to think that they
Sure.
don't, you know, employees
That's
and
what it is.
customers. Yeah,
that's what it is. I mean, look, I've as I jokingly say, as a business person, I have been homeless, jobless, and $20,000 in somebody else's debt. And I have also built businesses on a shoestring, literally from nothing, into six-figure businesses and been a CEO. So I've been at the top, I've been at the bottom. I've you know, I've worked with corporations. I've worked with major corporations. I've worked with small companies. I built my own company a few times.
This is very much like a conversation I had with Rob Howard a few months back, and he was saying, he grew up in a family business, and he had to sweep the floor, and he had to greet customers, he had to get the float out counted at nighttime. So it's the business fundamentals, isn't it?
Yeah, it's this understanding that it's not like in some ways it's like a game, but it's about people, and people forget that. It's really about people, and you could pretty much do any business you want, but you have to understand how the people function or how that business functions. So it's getting to the people side of things. I always say you gotta tap into humanity before you can tap into their pocket.
That's a good point, isn't it? I think it maybe about maybe 20 years ago, the whole emotional intelligence came out in with Daniel Goleman. And then after that, that started to getting percolating into the corporates. And then, you had a lot of corporate people coming out and management consultants saying, if you treat people with kindness, they'll actually, you'll retain employees and customers. Wow.
And they function better. Oh my God. And people are happier in their company. And I've known that my whole bloody life.
So, common sense, isn't it?
Yes, it's called common sense. I mean, and in some ways it's kind of old world thinking, from the old family business model, which is from the 50s and, from when I was growing up. And that's more the, family business model. And that's something I always understood was that, if you're going to do any businesses, you got to treat them like family because, you're relying on them as well as they're relying on you, and it goes hand in hand. And if you don't do that, then it all falls apart. It's when businesses go belly up and you got embezzling problems and you got all sorts of other crazy things that happen. But pretty much you could start anything you want, any business you want. Just understand that the love of it has to be there first. The heart, it's got to have the heart first, and then the numbers and everything else goes with it. But it's very heart-centered first. And people don't realize that's, if you look at everybody, look at all the big people that are in business, Bronson and, Jobs and everybody that has ever made it really big, it's always been a heart-centered mission. Their business always was some sort of heart-centered business mission, that something that they felt very deeply they wanted to do, something they felt very deeply that they believed in, and then everything else comes with it, then the knowledge and how to work it and how to, those are all other things that come with it, and either they have those skill set or they bring people in with those skill set to work with them. But you work as a family, that's what makes things work at the best that they could possibly work.
So do you think these entrepreneurs, I'm thinking of Richard Branson, who we talked about, I think, on Susanna's podcast a few episodes ago, that, he struggled getting back to the whole education thing, that he struggled with dyslexia. So do you think to be a high-powered or entrepreneur, or even to be an entrepreneur of any kind, you have to have some demon or some struggle in your life? Or is it possible? No,
absolutely not. Not necessarily. No, but what you have to have is you have to have a real belief in what you're doing or what you want to do. I mean, so many... I work now as a life coach, and I started doing that mostly because I'm of the baby boomer generation. And once you reach over 60, the world wants us to be invisible. And and retire.
But you have all the money, so you know you
Well,
don't have to worry.
I'm trying
Boomers,
to,
I mean, not
yes, we have the money because we use the money intelligently.
Well, life was easier
but-
for you. I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Oh, hell
millennial
no.
thing.
If you think
Yeah.
life was easier for us, are you kidding me? You guys got it. You know, this is the one thing about the
I'm
pandemic.
Generation X now, so you
This
can leave
is
me out.
this is something about the pandemic that really just made me nuts. Is that everybody was carrying on? Oh my God, it's so terrible. Oh my God, we can't do this. Oh my God, it's the worst thing. We got locked down. And you know what? What really makes me nuts is that I'm like, really, people, it really wasn't that bad. Let's put it into real perspective.
Sure. At home with
Okay.
Netflix, it's not that bad, is it?
Let's put it into real perspective. You still got goods delivered. Things were being delivered to you. Yes, you were getting, you were able to get things, except in like third world countries and stuff where it was really more difficult. But for the most part, in the United States and places, the big countries where they were whining the loudest, you still got things that were able to do, you know, your lifestyle, other than going out and traveling all over the place, was not so bloody different. You were able to eat well. You were able to, you know, work from home. You were able to do things that were not taken away necessarily. Okay. You were able to see people, even if you couldn't physically touch them. You could see them on Zoom. You could see them on video conferencing of all sorts, you know? I mean, think about this. This is not the first time the world has been locked down for 2 or more years. It was locked down during the Spanish influenza crisis and polio and we had the same thing. But think about it. Back then, when it was locked down and you were locked in your home by yourself, you were literally locked in your home by yourself. And you didn't see anybody. And you couldn't call them up on the telly to talk to somebody. You were by yourself. And you didn't have goods distribution because they didn't have those kind of goods distributions back then. You had to physically go to places. And if you couldn't physically go to places, guess what? You didn't get things. So I would suspect it was a hell of a lot harder back then to go through the 2-year shutdowns because of health reasons than these.
And still in countries like India, you know,
They're still getting.
it's far worse, isn't it?
You know, and the thing is, for people to keep whining about it, it's like, what are you whining about? You get to talk to people. You aren't isolated to the point of like staring at yourself, you know? It's really not so bad. You still got your bloody video games. You're watching movies till the cows come home. I mean, really, you're on your phones 24/7 with your friends. You're TikToking each other to death. I mean, it's really not so bad. So instead of complaining about it, make something of it. Make it useful. And those who have been are really, you know, I've been working harder than I've ever worked in my life this past year for the pandemic. Because my IT business suddenly raised its little head because everybody suddenly needed IT. Nobody knew all those who were avoiding computers like I did for years suddenly needed them, and they didn't know how to work them, and they didn't know how to put them together, and I could do that for them. I could do it in person if I had to. You know, if they were local in my complex, I said I would do it in person if they were local in my complex, so they knew everybody was vaccinated. But I said I could do it like on the phone. I could walk you through it. I could do it with video. You could show me what you're doing. So it's like me being in your room anyway and helping you fix it. And we can order parts to get it in there. So I could, you know, I could work on it for you and stuff.
So
But
here's a question for you. Just on this, it's kind of topical as we're speaking. It's the 6th of August, and the revelations about, well, Facebook went down for. That's another thing people
that
are
was
whining
pretty
about.
funny.
Yeah, Facebook
Oh,
went down. But then, of course, I think in Congress, there's some hearings that what's the quote that Facebook is well, triggering people. It's playing on people's worst fears and emotions in order to maximize the profitability of the company rather than mental. Yeah,
I think there's lots of businesses that play lots of business games and lots of mind games for control. And it's all about control. It's really about control. And, but, it only proves one point that I used to tell my students at Pace University all the time. Because in my classes, I tried to discourage them. I said, you can use your computers outside of my classroom, but I do not want you using your tablets when you're in my classroom. You're not allowed to use your phones unless it's a specific assignment or a specific project we're doing. You're not allowed to use them. And they're like, but I need to do it to write. I said, well, there's something called a pencil and a paper. You can write with that. And well, I needed to get information. I said, there's something called a library, and you can actually take a book out and read it.
Yeah, I know. It's you see students, they come to school, they have the latest tablet,
latest greatest,
phone, and they have no pen,
and they're not functioning.
No notebook. Yeah,
they're not functioning. And I said to them, they go, why? Because I got this. I don't need it. And I said, not for nothing, but what if your battery dies? Well, I plug it in, but what if there's no electricity? Well, then I have satellite. I say, but what if those go down? What are you going to do? You need to function.
So it sounded a little bit like what preppers say, isn't it? You go to the mountains and store all your tin food with your with your weaponry. But
so it was great when Facebook went down. They were all like, "Oh my God, I can't talk to anybody. I can't find anybody." I was like, "You have a phone? Call them up."
I saw a report on the BBC. They were doing some vox pops, and there was people saying, "Oh yeah, I couldn't reach my mother." Another guy, and there's other young woman. She's probably early 20s, and they asked her, what did you think about Facebook, Instagram going down? She said, "I think it's the best thing ever. I think Facebook and Instagram are the worst thing ever happened to this planet." But but yeah. So getting on to so I wanted to kind of talk about Facebook and mental health and resiliency as your and this is something that not just entrepreneurs have to deal with, but what kind of tips, what kind of pointers would you give to people who are thinking about starting the entrepreneurial journey, or going through difficulties that we all have to learn, as a coach? From your background.
So like I said, I started doing this business. It's called Living Out Loud. Ain't over yet. Because I was finding a lot of my baby boomer friends and colleagues were all being put out to pasture, which is kind of BS, excuse me. We have a whole lifetime still yet to go, a good 30, 40 plus years. And that's a lifetime, for crying out loud. Why should we be put out to pasture now? And people are looking for businesses. So yes, I started getting a lot of people coming to me looking to, how do I start my business? And how come I bought into this great box business and it didn't work? And I said, well, maybe it was something you really didn't want to do in the first place. So my suggestion is sit down before you go. You want to do your own business. Good. You want to do something that that will make money and have a better life for you. That's great. But the truth is that if it doesn't resonate or fit right with you, it's going to fail, and it's going to keep failing because you deep down inside really don't want to do it. So what you need to sit down is actually think about what your skill set is. What do I do? What do I know? And not just your skill set in your recent job or your recent career, which unfortunately we have a tendency to define ourselves on whatever our last career or our last long-term job was, right? We tend to define who we are by that. And it's kind of a block, what I call an abundance block, because what it does is it blocks your energy from really flowing. Because you are not your last job, and you are not your last career. You are
or your
so
last
much more.
husband or wife,
Or your last relationship, or your last family, or your last country. You are not that. You are you. And what you need to do is sit down. And what I always have my people do is I sit them down. I said, let's go through all the things. And we're talking from when you were a little kid to now. Which if you are my age, which is way over 60 or 70 or 80 or 90, you got a hell of a lot of years of skill set, right? And that's a lot more than the last 10, 20 years or something of what you were doing something. So you go through the whole skill set, and we go through the whole skill set. Things that they did or have done or learned. Things that they had skill sets for that they threw away somewhere down the road because somebody told them, oh, you're too old, or oh, that's not a good thing, or oh, that's not the right thing to do. Nonsense. Anything is a good thing to do. Everything is a good thing to do. So you just figure out what your skill set is. And then, you go through the skill set. And then what I usually tell them to do is think about, and we've all done things like even for a moment, whatever. Think about a time. And usually those are the biggest, strongest memories that we have, right? Think about a time when you were absolutely, most insanely the happiest. And what were you doing? And usually those are the things that are going to bring that feeling back. And then we go through, okay, so what were you doing? Now, this is your skill set. This is what you were doing when that feeling blew up. And why did that feeling blew up? Let's really think about it. What about whatever you were doing at the time was making you so insanely happy? Was it, the recognition people were giving you? What was it? Was it the actual action that you were doing? What was it? And then when we narrow that down, we look at their skill set and we look at the action or what actually triggered, as I always tell my children, the happy place. My kids are always like, Ma, really? I said, I'm telling you, if it triggers your happy place, Mom's happy. So what triggers your happy place? What was the happy place? What is your skill set? Now, we put it together and we see where do they intersect. And then when we see where they intersect, we start thinking about, okay, what could we possibly do that would make us money? Like, oh, I always loved to write. I was always very good at writing. So maybe you might want to write a book or think about writing poetry or, is it more creative things or informational things? But you have a really good skill set as an educator. So maybe you might want to write a book because you like education, but you really love writing, but everybody told you it was silly. So, but you were creative at it. So maybe you could think of a creative way to write that educates. Now, you can monetize that and it becomes a business. But it becomes a business that's going to become successful because it's something that comes from your heart. It's something that came from your mission place. And that's what every successful business person or every successful billionaire, millionaire person they've all came from a place. They got excited about making deals, or they got excited about a piece of technology, or they got excited about something something excited them and they ran with it. And that's really what entrepreneurship is about. And that's what I've been pretty much my whole life as an entrepreneur. I had a very successful business where I sold handcrafted, hand-designed ornaments, Christmas ornaments, and dolls. Because I was a sculptor and I loved designing and I loved making things. And I was good at it. And I loved making these little teddy things, which is how my company's name was born, the Roving Teddy, because I had these little teddy motifs. And I was very successful because I loved what I was doing and I wanted to make it the best that it could be. And that's the thing, is when you love what you're doing and you're really happy about what you're doing and why you're doing it, the tendency is you're going to work towards making it the best it can be because you love making it the best that you can make it. And ultimately, that makes a better business. It makes a business that will be successful. It makes a business that monetarily will be successful because other people will see. And, you know, it's like, you ever notice when a really good business person or a really, like, even an educator, right, who's really about their stuff, like Scott Thornbury walks in the room, you get really excited, right? Because you knew you're going to get something really great because this guy is like really into his stuff, right? You get excited about, customers get excited about it, you know. And then the other thing, the other component with entrepreneurs is the money side. We have a tendency to have these really negative money blocks where we've told ourselves or somebody has told us bad stories about money. Like, you know, we all know it. Some of us who grew up Christian, money is the root of all evil. So it's in our head.
Sure, we dealt. I think Rachel Roberts' podcast. If people want to listen back to that one, we talked about. She, I think, runs some workshops on you know, attitudes to money. Yeah.
Because, you know, you got these bad attitudes like, you know, money is the root of all evil, or I don't want to be rich because rich people are all bad people, right? But when you
money
really
doesn't grow on trees, and
but
that's probably a good one. Yeah.
When you really think about it and you really put it into perspective, it's not a bad thing to ask for a lot of money for what you're worth. Okay? If you really believe that you're worth that amount, then you're worth that amount. If you really believe your advice or your contribution to somebody's life, you know, is your business, and it's worth that, then it's worth that. And instead of thinking that, oh, I'm asking them for too much money and they're gonna and I'm robbing them, because those are all the negative things. Those are the money blocks. If you realize that, look, it's like a thank you, okay? You know, when you see something that you really love, you don't mind giving them money for it because you really want it. It's like, thank you. I thank you for giving me this wonderful thing. I'm going to give you something, right? You know, you give a waiter a tip. You're thanking them, right? The more you give them, it's a thank you. Thank you for doing something wonderful for me. So basically, that's kind of the same thing. You know, if you are really doing a business from your heart and you're really doing a business that's, you know, heart-centered, mission-centered, you're giving something to somebody. There's nothing wrong.
And to pay money for it as well. I think I've been dipping into this book recently, No BS Price Strategy by Dan Kennedy. And I don't know if you know Dan Kennedy's work, but he talks very much about that, the danger of free and giving yourself away free and charging
because we think we're not worth it. But we are worth it, you know? I mean, we are worth it. Because when you think about, instead of thinking about what am I necessarily worth, think about what value have I just given them? Like, I give you an advice on how to start your business, and you now have a successful business, but more importantly, you have a successful life. You are now being given a life. A renewed life.
So now Judy Wong has given us a lot
you?
of valuable information this evening, and from her many years in different businesses and her coaching. So for people to listen to this, you know, and how, for example, could they get in contact with you if they want to work with you?
You can go to my website, Living Out Loud Ain't Over Yet, no punctuation, all one word, .com.
Bad English teacher. Okay.
I know. Livingoutloud.com.
Okay,
livingoutloud.ain'toveryet.com.
Okay, I'll put it in the show notes anyway, so people
Okay.
can click on it there. And you're still taking coaching clients? Is it coaching client? What do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I coach. I'm actually an energy healer. I'm what they call a light worker, because I'm a clairsentient. But I work it with healing negative blocks. I work with breaking through abundance blocks with people and giving them like a new lease on life, as it were. Because my goal right now, my mission is, and this is why I started this newest business, is I am really tired of watching my generation be told we should be invisible, and watching them look depressed, lost, and being told so much garbage. And we were never a quiet generation. So I cannot imagine why anybody in my generation is willing to be bullied into silence. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, we need to live our life for living and stop listening to the world telling us that we should be living our life for our death. Because who the hell knows when our death is going to be? So I like to say, live your life for living. And that's my mission, is to help people find life again when the world is trying to take it away from them.
Okay, so I think that's a really great place to leave it today. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you again, Judy. Of course, we met in person a few years ago, and we had some great wine every night, I think, but the staff tried to take it off us. But that's a story for another time. But yeah, so I'll have Judy's website in the show notes as well, so you'll be able to look at it there. And you're in all the usual places: LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok.
No TikTok things.
Yeah.
My kids are trying to get me into the 21st century. I said I am sort of.
Well, TikTok is just very attractive Asian
I don't know.
women, so I try to
people...
not look at it so much. Yeah.
I'm I can be found. I will drop you all the links so you could put it into your show notes. But yeah, I could be found pretty much everywhere.
Okay, great.
Under the Judy Wong.
The Judy Wong. Okay,
yes,
good. So, Judy, thanks again.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.